Hello and welcome. It's This Is Going Well, I think, with David Cooper, and I am David Cooper. It's This Is Going Well, I think, the show where no one's listening, no one cares. The show where every show is the last show. Today, it's my friend, sexual health and consent educator, Samantha Bitty, to shoot the shit. We'll shit the shot, but we won't play shot put. So put on your shots. I'm starting to make no sense. It's Samantha Bitty, all the way from Toronto, Canada, probably. I haven't seen her in a while. I'm looking forward to catching up. That's enough about you, Samantha. You're really dominating the conversation.
You know what?
How have you been? It's been 78 months since I've spoken to you, seen you.
So much has happened since I last saw you. It was months ago.
Surgeries, other things.
Other things. Yeah.
I think I captured it all there, really.
That's more or less everything. Yeah.
You traveled?
I did. Yes.
Went to the Caribbean or Caribbean? How do you say that one?
I say Caribbean.
Me too.
Yeah. I spent December in Trinidad. Yeah. It was delightful.
Delightful. The weather must have been better at the very least.
Oh my goodness. Like waking up every day to the sun and then spending the day, even though my cousin and I literally just like stayed inside and watched trash television and chain smoked cigarettes, it was still 10 out of 10 better than what it would have been like if I was here. So yeah, it was great. It was great.
People don't feel guilty for doing that in a cold climate. Why should you feel guilty for doing that in a warm climate?
Yeah, no, and I think because Trinidad is very much like my second home. I think of it more as like my home because this does not feel like home to me. Um, there isn't that same pressure to like go outside, go to the beach. Like I love going to the beach, and like I did do like a Tobago holiday for like 5 days and like did that whole thing. I love the ocean, all of that, but there isn't that same feeling of like, oh no, I like wasted a day. It's like, no, I waste days all the time. Like it's not, it's entry level.
You get in there with all those fish and barracudas and sharks and shit? You get right in there, or you're on the beach? You leave the water to the water?
I am predominantly beach oriented, but I do take a shallow dip. Like I've never gone into the ocean to a depth that I can't touch the bottom.
I've seen videos of sharks like chasing seals to the beach pretty much and getting them like 5 feet from where the water hits the sand.
Yeah, there's not like a ton of, and maybe I don't even know if this is a true statement. I have never been confronted with any scary aquatic life whilst in Trinidad.
The ocean is pure violence, Samantha. The ocean is pure violence.
I don't disagree with you, and I am very cautious. If like a fish, even a little fish swims by, I'm like, all right, that'll do, and I'm out. But yeah, I again, I go in for a little dip, I do my little meditative moment, and then I'm back on land.
I won't even get in pools because the chlorine messes with your skin, and as someone with a vagina, it messes with your pH. And then so they say, okay, swim in a saltwater pool. Well, then it doesn't kill the germs. You'll be covered in fungus in a week if you get in a saltwater pool.
Fungus, yeah.
And lakes, snapping turtles, dude, snapping turtles.
Lakes sick me out. Like a lake is never my like, oh, let's jump in the lake. Like I've done it, but I've spent entire weeks at like cottages in Ontario and like never touched the water. Like I'm like, ew.
Do you know what cottaging is in UK English?
No, what is it?
Like going to a toilet, a public toilet, and men cruising for sex with men. Cottaging.
Hot.
So when you say, like, as a Canadian or even an American from the Northeast to a British person, oh, I went cottaging this weekend, they're like, what the fuck?
Right. Yeah, I always find lake water to be too cold as well.
Yeah, freezing.
So I'm like, ew. Yeah, everything about it is quite ick. I love being in proximity to water. Like I love looking at it. I love how it feels. energetically, but I'm not necessarily the one who's like jumping in. I feel a lot of fear around large bodies of water.
Water is pure death. That's all it is. Water is death. In small amounts, it's life, sure. But for us land roamers, it's death. The ocean's death. Lakes are death. Hurricanes are death. Everything to do with water is death.
I avoid puddles, like,
I remember when we were kids, we were on our little tiny bicycles and we were driving through a neighborhood and someone was draining their pool. You know those big hoses? They just drain them all over the roads. Anyway, there's some huge puddles on the road and it was a summer day. And so we're like, let's launch into these puddles. And so we did, and we got covered in water. And then just the pure stank. I think it was winter pool water. You know, when like the storm, it was like not chlorinated.
Yeah.
And I've never smelled as bad as I smelled that day. So puddles mess with you too, man. Puddles mess with you.
It's just not it, and I was never even one of those kids who was like, let's jump in a puddle. I don't like to be dirty and I don't like to be wet, like without a plan. Like if there isn't like a clear cut plan on how I'm going to be dry again, it's not for me. I don't like that sensation.
Wetness without a plan is no way to live.
And that across the board, like, I gotta have a plan. I gotta have a plan.
Yeah. And I think that should be a bare minimum human right. People shouldn't have to be wet without a plan.
Without a plan. I need a plan.
There are people out there who get wet without plans because society stopped caring for them. And we need to care about these people because that sucks. That's no way to live.
That's under-resourced. Yeah.
Agreed. It sounds like I'm making fun, and I am because it's a hilarious thing, but I do believe what I'm saying. Okay, so you went to Trinidad. You watched a lot of trashy TV. Love is Blind.
Oh, yes.
Anything else?
Too Hot to Handle.
Haven't seen it. Good.
Season after season after season. It's terrible. It's like, it's horrific. At a certain point, my cousin and I built like a bingo game of like, okay, this is the absolute chaotic and predominantly white foolishness that we need to like keep track of.
Laughing at white foolishness on TV. I mean, is that a guilty pleasure of yours?
I don't feel guilty about it.
No, I know. More guilty about wasting your time doing it than the act.
It's not a waste of time.
Good.
I really push back on the notion of wasting time. For me, like I'm so intentional about my choices that I rarely feel like I'm wasting time. Like last night, for example, a friend of mine, we were just texting, she's like, how was your night? Like, are you doing anything? And I'm like, I'm rotting, but like in an empowered way. And she was like, can you elaborate on that? I was like, absolutely. I woke up from my nap. I had been in bed at that point for like 3 hours beyond waking up from my nap. I like got the resources I needed, like my bottle of soda water, and I was like eating a cold Costco poutine that was like bedside from earlier in the day.
Oh.
No, it was impeccable. Don't make that face.
Fine, I won't yuck someone's yum.
And I was watching fucking true crime. And I was like, yeah, this is an empowered rotting. Like I'm disgusting, but I want it. Like it's making me feel like this is a good use of my time this Wednesday evening.
Rotting in an empowered way and never be wet without a plan. We've already got like 2 great sound bites from you, Samantha.
I am probably one of the most quotable people on earth.
Should I quote that? I mean, would you put that on your, if you had to make like a web page of quotes, would you put that on there?
Back in the day when I was like in my early 20s and I used to like party a lot, friends of mine were DJs and they always had parties and we were always like, we just partied a lot. And it really lent itself well to my alcoholism, TBH. But one of the guys that I always partied with, still friends with him to this day, he had this kind of like ongoing joke about how he was like, I want to write a book called Shit Sam Says, because I am just perpetually out of pocket, but in a way that is like really charming and witty. And I wear it well.
Good. I mean, we've already got 2 quotes for the book. Do you like Fran Lebowitz at all? She's like the quintessential New Yorker.
You've talked to me about her many times.
You've never, she's like a 2'8", 70-year-old lesbian Jew who has the biggest mouth. And if you're like I've never seen her in public, but she's the kind of person that if you ever are in her way walking in public in New York, she's gonna let you hear about it in the most stereotypical New Yorker way. Like she to me is embodies New York. And I was on her website because she doesn't have a cell phone, she doesn't use the internet, but I guess her publicist or whatever made a website for her. And there's a list of quotes, and this one was so, especially as a Jew, this quote is maybe the best quote I've ever read. And it's the opposite of talking is not listening. The opposite of talking is waiting. And I love it. Because she's just like, she's so loud and she doesn't listen, and it's so part of her personality. And it's like, no, if you want me to stop talking, I'm not going to listen. I'm just going to wait. And it's just, I loved it. It was, I don't know, maybe it's a.
No, I think that that's like quite profound actually. And there is that kind of question of like, true listening is a willingness to have your mind changed by whatever is said next. And there's a lot of criticism around people's inability to listen, active listening. And it's like, are you listening or are you waiting for your chance to speak? Right. And so, I think what makes you a good interviewer is that you are listening,
Oh,
right? Like you're responsive.
focusing on what's coming next. I'm like I heard an interview with my favorite musician, and he's like, I'm always 4 bars ahead. He's like, especially when he's doing improvising and stuff, he's like, I'm not focusing on what's happening right now. I'm 4 bars ahead. And I'm like, that's what you have to do as an interview. You're focusing, like you're doing your best to be present in that moment. He's a great musician at the bar that he's at right now, but his mind is 4 bars. And that's what I try to do. And do I do it well? No. But anyway, I interrupted you.
I think you do
Oh, thank you.
do it well, or else I wouldn't still be speaking to you years
Oh,
later.
oh.
You know how I feel about being interviewed by men. First of all, how dare thee? Like,
Fine.
um, yeah, that's a full sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, I do know how you feel about being interviewed by men. And you've never actually told me how you feel, but I know how you feel about it.
I absolutely have told you because there are plenty of interviews that I've been called for where after the interview, I'm like, oh, they were just trying to set up a certain narrative
Mm.
and weren't really responsive to what my insight or whatever was. They were just trying to like drive whatever point they wanted to make.
They had a conclusion about something sex advice or sex health related, and they had you on to get to their conclusion, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that what I think makes a good interviewer is that yes, of course you go into it with your questions, but those questions need to be able to evolve as the discourse evolves, right? Or else why are you interviewing someone? And I did have a really good experience being interviewed by this one man. I can't remember his name. He's with the CBC, and it was for I can't even remember what the show was called. Like this was whatever. Anyway, he was really, I feel like I told you about this because he was really hot. So I show up to the interview. I had like a pre-interview and it was video. And I'd asked the pre-interviewer, like, is this being visually recorded? And she's like, no, no, no. I'm like, okay, so I can show up kind of mangy. Like, this is fine. I show up like peak mangy, like hair, like I had like rollers, like it was not cute. I show up and this man is fine as hell. And I was like, I am so cute. Like, why did you set me up like this? Like, I felt.
Yeah, who is this producer? She's doing you dirty.
She really did. I mean, granted, he has a husband or he has a wife and kids and whatever, but like everybody's not monogamous. So I was just like, wow. So I was immediately taken aback and like not prepared for my interview.
I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to hear it as insulting, and it might actually be insulting. And I apologize in advance. Are you sure he was a great interview, or were you just distracted by his handsomeness?
He was a great interviewer. He was.
And also you were distracted by his handsomeness.
I was only distracted by his handsomeness for like a moment, but because I wasn't in my handsomeness, it's like it's not even a level playing field. So it's like I'm not even going to have that lens on. It's kind of like if I'm going to the grocery store, for example, and I'm like I don't want to be perceived, whatever. It doesn't matter how hot someone is. Not that I ever see hot people when I'm grocery shopping, but you know what I mean? It won't matter how hot someone is if I don't feel like I'm in my element. It becomes a moot point. So no, he was actually a very, very good interviewer. And it was interesting how much we spoke about and what made it into the final kind of production. And yeah, I just thought he was very disarming and like very easy to talk to. And I think you share that same quality. Like I've always really enjoyed,
Oh,
even when we were professionally doing it, like quote unquote, like when we had obligations to maintain the integrity of the interview by like regulatory standards. Like you were still always very good.
I couldn't talk about stretching open my butthole. Not that I would do that because I have fissures. I was just trying to think of an example of lack of decorum. Whatever. Well, thank you. But back to the Fran Lebowitz quote. The opposite of talking is not talking. The opposite of listening is not listening. And I love that. I don't know. It's funny. If you heard it in her voice, you gotta watch this show. Pretend It's a City.
Okay.
You'll like it.
Okay.
Martin Scorsese is obsessed with Fran Lebowitz.
Hmm.
And she has this gorgeous apartment, and I think I've already told you all this, gorgeous apartment in the Upper West Side, and she has no idea how she pays off her mortgage. So every few years, he's always trying to make a show with her, and she's like, fuck it, I need money. I'll do a miniseries with you. He did a movie like maybe 15 years ago with him, and then recently she did Pretend It's a City. And she says that like in the tour when the show was being promoted, she like went on late night TV and said that's why she did it. And she's just like, yeah, I don't know. Okay, I'll stop. I have a crush on her, but she would destroy me. She eats pieces of shit like me for breakfast.
My goodness. You know what? I really identify with her in terms of like, I mean, the work I do, fortunately, is, very purpose-based. It's like the purpose of my life, all of that. And there are many ways I do that work without being compensated, or at least not being compensated in a way that is like financially viable, right? Um, but I absolutely work as little as possible to sustain my lifestyle. And I live my life in like 3 to 6 month increments. I'm like, okay, I'm good for like 6 months. I'll worry about this later,
Yeah.
and I try to be in a position where I never take work for money and I never turn down something that is meaningful if there isn't enough money. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Would you take, like, do you have like a personal compromise to price ratio for the kind of work you'll take? I feel like I do. Doesn't bode well for me as a performer, but like okay, I'll do it. I'm like 80% compromised, but 20% not, but the pay is amazing. Like, there must be some, like, two lines that intersect where it's like work that you feel compromised doing. Obviously, you'd never do something where you felt 100% compromised. And then some other, perpendicular curve or whatever, where it's like amount of money.
yeah, I mean, because we do very different types of work. So
Sure.
if a job is in contrast or in conflict with my values, then no, it doesn't matter the amount of money. You know what I mean? Like I don't take anti-racism gigs that the client has no intention of repair. They just want to like tick off a box. Like I won't do that type of work.
That's so many companies, though.
Of course, yeah. You saw my post today about Black History Month and our recent history of people giving a shit, just reflecting on that. But I would say an example would be me doing like a sex toy bingo, right? Like a school or a residence or something like that hiring me to do sex toy bingo. That shit is so like I have a lot of problems with it for a number of reasons. And when I've done them, I usually inject as much education as I can. But that would be like the one time where I'm like, all right, at the end of the day, I'm a host. I'm hosting a thing. They acknowledge that their, educational outcomes are like very small. Like their desired outcomes are very, limited. So yeah, I'll do it.
What's the issue with sex toy bingo? And I'm going to regret asking this question. Let's pretend I already know.
There's nothing wrong with sex toy bingo. Okay, I lie. To me, if you're providing young people with uh sex toys or creating like a sex related environment, there is an obligation to have a critical lens with that and to with young people, right? Like with with folks who are in their, 20s, late teens, college age or whatever, with like grown adults, like, and not that they're not grown, but blah, 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 blah. Like for me as an educator, I'm like, I don't want to just make like sexy, problematic jokes, which is what usually happens.
Yeah, everyone's laughing at the toys, at these things.
Yeah, or they're not properly informed on the purpose of them or whatever it is, right? So I have a very deep-seated need to educate. And it's why I predominantly stay away from like social media now as a medium, right? You and I've talked about this. I'm like, it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's work for other people. Right. Like what I have to offer, what I want to offer, what's meaningful to me is just more nuanced than that. And so while it is not a direct conflict with my values, and I always find a way to inject my values into everything I do, um, there is an element of like, yeah, that is work for somebody who has a different, matrix of advocacy inside them.
Love it. I mean, don't love it, but love the explanation. I wanted to zoom all the way back to TV. I may regret asking you this question, but have we talked about the show Naked Attraction yet?
No.
Excellent.
Okay.
Have you seen the show Naked Attraction?
No.
I may have just changed your life. Maybe.
Okay.
Forget Fran Lebowitz. Forget anything I've ever told you. Drop everything. It is a British show. It is a dating show. It's very simple. You are a chooser, and there's 6 contestants. Okay? Like you come out, let's say you like men, you like women, you like non-binary people. They find you 6 eligible candidates they have gay men, gay women, it doesn't matter. They have 6 eligible candidates who you could date given your stated preferences, your identity, whatever. Okay. So there's 6 pods. They're like phone booths, but they're opaque. So you see like a backlit of a person in there, like a shadow.
Sure.
So they raise the pods from the bottom to the ceiling to reveal just the person's waist. They are completely naked. It zooms right into their genitals. These are not porn genitals. These are everyday run-of-the-mill fungus spots. You can tell some guys in the back room are kind of juicing, because there's maybe a little dribble of pre-cum on some of them. There's piercings, all body shapes, all body sizes. It's wild, and it zooms right in, and it made me realize how much porn has shaped what I think of the porn and the people I've slept with. That's it. That's all I had. These are just run-of-the-mill, everyday British genitals. Stubble, razor burn, the whole 9 yards. And it's like any shape, size. Porn really selects for certain shapes and sizes, and it's not reflective. These things. And I know them intellectually, but okay. So then this person, all they have to go on is the junk in the legs. They eliminate one of them. Okay?
This is horrible.
It's so great. And they have to be like, oh, his dick was too small, or oh, the body type. And then the host makes them tell why they eliminate. Okay? Then it raises to just below the head, to the chest. So for women, you see the breast. For men, and then they eliminate another person. They still haven't seen their faces, okay? Then they raise it. You've only got 4 people left. Then they eliminate one based on the face. And then all the 3 remaining say something. And that's where it's really interesting, because British people, occasionally, not all British people, discriminate based on accent. It's a weird form of regional classism that, it sort of exists in Canada and the US, but in the UK, it's dialed up to 11. So that sometimes happens, and it's pretty ugly if you ask me, but whatever. Sometimes people prefer Scottish or Northern accents, which are stereotypically less posh. They will sometimes eliminate people from London because they're from the north and they don't. And even that I find strange. But I guess they're worried the people with the posh accents. Anyway, okay. Then the person who's picking, there's 2 left. The person who's picking goes backstage, takes off all their clothes. They get naked. Same deal. Zoomed in, zoomed way in. And then they select from the last 2, one to go on a date. And then they go on a fully clothed date. And then they interview them a month later to see how it went. That's the show. It's phenomenal.
This is peak sadism.
Yes.
I want to know how many lawsuits they've gotten.
They probably have a pretty good legal like waiver, I guess is what it is.
My goodness. I hope they provide therapy. That is horrific. That is a nightmare.
It's so great. It's so good.
Oh my goodness.
You are gonna love it. Will you at least give it a shot?
I will look into it when I'm in a really stable place.
They're very body positive. Like even when people are like a body shape that the person doesn't like, they'll say like what they like about them. Like as they eliminate them, they won't be like, oh, they're gross, they're this way. So it is kind of body positive. It's at least paying lip service to it.
I mean, one thing I will give to the premise is it is really cutting through any bullshit about the ways in which we choose attraction visually, right? Like where, I think about the number of people that I've dated or had sex with who are like not great humans or like not very interesting or like not smart or whatever because they're hot and or I think they're hot or I'm attracted to them, right? And I'm weary of the like attraction based on junk, like as someone who like I think that that is a very like
It's wild.
it's not it for a number of reasons. Um but yeah, it really doesn't. It's like the absolute polar opposite of Love is Blind.
It's love is 2020.
Visually, like full frontal.
It's wild. Yeah, I'm always like the first one you just eliminate based on the junk. The second one, the chest. I'm like, that's the two hardest decisions, right? Because you don't have all the visual facts, I guess. And so I'm always like, you got to at least get to that final four where you can see their whole face, body. Because like then, I mean, just like the look on someone's ambient idle face. Like I need that. To me, that's where it's at. If I'm gonna go based on looks.
Right.
I if you give me a chopped off head, I don't know.
Have you heard of dick filler?
Yes, I've interviewed two, one urologist and one plastic surgeon on this show who do penile injections, and according to those two doctors who do them, very safe. Not the best sample set.
I want you to tell me more.
So it's very popular in like beach community. It doesn't really affect your boner. It affects your idle penis. So it's really showing off to others in the gym, in the skimpy bathing suit, in the sauna. My understanding, and then like just walking around naked, like you just look like you have a huge piece. But when you're erect, I don't know how much it adds, maybe just a bit. And so it's very interesting, the reasons for getting it. It's not just to have the larger sex penis. It's to come off like you're packing heat all the time.
Sex penis.
Yeah, and it's obviously, I mean, this probably is more popular in the gay community.
My understanding is that it impacts girth, but not length.
Mm-hmm.
Like yeah, that it's like it can make a penis look thicker, but it doesn't make it look longer.
But flaccid, it does make it look longer.
Okay.
It makes you look like you have a semi-chub all the time. A semi-lob-on.
You know what? In terms of, okay, so I'm kind of into that in the sense of like the way that we like erect nipples. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, yeah, like if I could have erect nipples all the time, I'd be like, yeah, I'd want that.
I'm sure you could somehow.
I don't think so. I recently rewatched Sex and the City, like from the beginning, and there is an episode where they have like fake erect nipples that they try out.
Like pasties.
Yeah, like nipple pasties that are like hard nipples or whatever.
There you
go. Yeah. But like au natural, like naturally, I don't think. I also have tiny nipples. Like the way that you know how you're saying like, oh, the only relationship I have to like junk awareness is like what I've seen in person and what I've seen in porn or whatever, right? It's kind of like that with breasts too, where it's like I've only seen the breasts that I've seen. And the breasts I've seen the most are my own.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really know that you have tiny nipples until you start seeing like a lot of breasts. And then even when you start seeing a lot of breasts, which I have, it's not until someone tells you, like, you have tiny nipples. It's like, okay. So even if I could have like 24/7 erect nipples, they're like tiny. So it's not like it's not the like jarring, like, you know,
Hmm.
I mean, jarring in like a positive way, like in a like, oh,
I hear that. Yeah. So you would get some sort of augmentation. No, I mean maybe you would or would not, but it would be of interest to you some sort of augmentation just to make the nipple itself erect all the time.
I don't think I would do an augmentation. I think it's just kind of like a wish. Like it's like if I could, I would, but I can't, so I don't. But it's like here we are.
So let's get back to these injections. It's kind of like Botox. I mean, it's a totally different compound, chemical, whatever, but it goes away after 6 months, 12 months.
Well, no, it's like lip filler, like any filler.
It's like filler. And I'll say this is totally off topic, but what was wild about one of these doctors is because it's a cosmetic surgery or whatever, somehow I made a comment, an offhand comment about the Canadian healthcare system, like because he's a for-profit doctor.
Hmm.
And he like took that comment and ran with it. And he made this weird argument about how the US system is better or whatever. Some Americans, especially right wingers, think this. But then he starts talking about Canada being this like communist, Marxist, dystopia. I'm like, what are you talking about? Then he starts saying, the votes for Biden weren't like all fraudulent and January, like he started going off the deep end, but he was like he was easy to talk to and on the surface rational. He was doing that thing that it's like arguing with someone. Do you know what apologetics are? And I'm really into like
Yeah.
atheism. Okay. It's like for those who don't know, it's like it's a very Christian practice, although I suppose it could be any religion. It's the idea of using kind of like science to prove religious arguments. So he was kind of doing like the apologetics version of right-wing conspiracy. But then he starts talking about how the COVID vaccine is a fraud. And I'm like, this is a licensed doctor. And,
Yeah.
like mandates and crazy cuckoo, wild cuckoo kind of thinking. And I was just like sitting there being like, we're supposed to talk about penis injections. And I just ran with it. And it was like I don't know. I tried my best to treat him with dignity and respect. And he tried his best to treat me with dignity and respect. And I mean, we would just not agree about everything, but it was just a fascinating interview to just like sit down with someone like that, especially when I wanted to do like a wild, sensational joke piece about penis injections. And then we ended up there. So I don't know. I just felt I needed to share that with you.
What I'm hearing is that everyone needs to find out the political leanings of their cosmetic urologists.
Yeah. I mean, you're anything really.
Yeah. Yeah. I, you struck a nerve with them,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
And what I'll say is that even people who get D's all throughout medical school still become a doctor.
That's true. D's for degree.
D is for degree. I mean, critical thinking isn't necessarily required for memorization.
Like I have friends who didn't get the vaccine because they're like, I don't trust pharmaceutical companies, like whatever. And at the time I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be indoors with you. I think you don't care about other people's health. Now I don't care. I'm friends with these people. I hang out with these people. Times have changed. And I sort of put them in one bucket. I'm like, look, we don't agree. We're starting from the same place. I don't trust pharmaceutical companies either. But on this one point I do, and here's why. And on this one point you don't. So it's like, I kind of see eye to eye in some sense. Whatever. Let sleeping dogs lie. Plus, it's 3-4 years later. I'm okay with it now. But 3 years ago, I was not, but it's where I am now. I have one. Well, he's not my friend anymore because he's too off the deep end. He's like, Bill Gates is putting a 5G tracking nanobot. And I'm like, and with him, I'm starting from the same place too. I don't trust large corporations. I don't trust the government. I don't trust pharmaceutical companies. But from that premise, people run wild. And so there's like two buckets of people that I don't agree with. There's like, okay, I kind of see where you're coming from. I don't agree with your conclusions, but they're like on this planet. And then there's people, it's just like, how does it happen? I don't know.
Is he one of those people who thinks that the birds are like CIA or whatever?
I don't think that, but I do think he thinks like, JFK wasn't killed and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Or JFK was, Pfizer nanobots. I don't know. It's not ever. How do you have a discussion with someone who's like, it's not a vaccine, it's a device? Like that's That's their starting place. How do you have a discussion?
I mean, you don't. As you know, my posture generally is like you can't reason with someone who's unreasonable.
Mhm.
And it becomes that thing kind of back to that point about what listening is. It's like we can have our principles and our values, and those things should be like foundational to us. Like if we've done the critical work of exploring them, but there does have to be a willingness to listen if I'm going to debate something with someone on both sides, right? Like I have to be willing to listen, I have to practice curiosity and empathy, and I require that from anyone who's going to be withdrawing my emotional or intellectual energy, right? So someone like that is just like, okay, I like don't fuck with that person anymore.
Yeah, I don't talk to the guy anymore. He's too for other reasons as well. But yeah, but it's sad. I was talking about this with a guy who specializes in conspiracy theory stuff on the show a while ago about JFK. And you don't have to know anything about it really to follow along here, anyone listening. But like, I kind of agree something's fishy about JFK.
Mm.
Lee Harvey Oswald. Like, I know something's up, and I don't trust the government. I don't trust the FBI. So like, from that place, I'm with, like, I agree with a ton of people, but it's like, okay, that's where I stop. I don't know what the facts are. I don't get to know it. I'm sure it'll be classified. It keeps on being reclassified in my lifetime. Trump was supposed to declassify him at the last minute. He didn't. And I'm like, well, you know what? I don't know. I'm not going to speculate because it'll drive me wild, and so it's like I have a lot of sympathy for people who end up, at the grassy knoll protesting, saying it's aliens, because it's like I kind of agree with you at the starting place, but I'm okay saying I don't know and probably not going to ever know and moving on with my life. And so that's kind of like how I feel about my friend with the tracking device. It's like I feel bad for him because I agree with where he's starting from, but I guess he's not comfortable saying I don't know.
I mean, there's been so much like what do you call it? Like psychological psychiatric investigation into what makes people vulnerable to conspiracy theories, cults, all of that. And I think at the root of it is that desire, that like deeply human desire to sense make,
Mhm.
and that and to meaning make, and that can go terribly awry
Mhm.
based on any number of sociological, sociopolitical.
And you mix that with the desire for community, and if you find a little community that's willing to kind of sense make the same as you, it's a really bad feedback loop. I get it.
But again, we've talked about this many times, about the like different types of empathy, and where there's like the cognitive empathy where it's like I can understand, like I can extend myself to understand, like it could never be me, but like I understand. And then there's like emotionally, like I feel this, and then there's like the compassionate empathy where it's like, okay, I'm willing to like take action to you know whatever it is, repair, be with, what, blah 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 blah. A lot of times I stop at the like cognitive empathy piece, or even like the feeling empathy piece. Compassionate empathy requires quite a bit of reciprocity for me to be willing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Samantha, let us leave it at that. It is always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you so much. Yes. To see you, to hear you,
Well,
to disagree or agree with you.
don't we agree on everything?
No.
We just had a disagreement.
There we go.